Hi, Shruti. How are you?
I'm doing great, Gaurav. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for taking out the time for this episode of Joy of Entrepreneurship. And just want to tell the audience of how much this means to me because I think you're one person that I'm really fond of. And I've told you many times because of the noise that you can cut and the signal that you can catch and the kind of depth conversation we can have on various nodes of entrepreneurship, which we've experienced before. But why don't we do this? Why don't we let you introduce your own self? I think just give a little bit of a background for the audience and we go from there.
Absolutely. I've had some fantastic conversations with Gaurav. We both have had parallel founding journeys. So, just a quick introduction. I spent 10 plus years in the corporate world, started with investment banking, investing, and fintech. Before I took the plunge into entrepreneurship, I started a company called Wingman, which was conversation intelligence for sales calls. And what that meant was, you know, things that we are very familiar with today, which is having note takers on your meetings, but Wingman would also give you real time feedback while you were on these sales conversations. In 2022, Wingman was acquired by Clary, sales tech unicorn based out of the Silicon Valley. We had a great journey over the 4 5 years that we were building the company. We were part of Y Combinator. We were figuring out lots of things from first principles. And while in hindsight, all of that looks great and glamorous, I also know how hard it is to be a founder. And I think that's where a lot of my journey today comes from and a lot of my energy today comes from. So a couple of years back, after having spent time at Clary, I decided to spend a lot of my time and energy in working with early stage founders and helping them through the rocky parts of going from an idea to finding product market fit. I work with founders both as a founder coach and also as part of the Momentum Studio, which is like a accelerator program for early stage founders in the AI B2B space.
No, that's great. And thanks for explaining the whole journey. There are many nuggets that we can pick from and go deep in that. But let me ask you a couple of questions before we begin, right? When you were in the investment banking world, why did you even choose to be an entrepreneur in the first place? What made you get into it? And then when you had tasted success for 4 5 years, while you did share that, you know, the founder journey can be hard, but what made you make the decision to exit out? So just maybe these two things, if you can talk maybe 5 minutes about it.
Sure. I think honestly, the investment banking journey is easy to say that I didn't enjoy it from the very beginning. It's just something that is a fairly hands off. You're and especially at the junior levels, a lot of your time is spent in just churning through data. Maybe today with AI, it's different. So, it felt very distant to me from where I could really act and make an impact, at least at this ground level of investment banking. What it did teach me was a valuable lesson in terms of just seeing businesses from outside in, because very often we don't get to see that objectively. You know, whether we are employees or founders, we are already fairly emotionally invested in the business. But as an investment banker, I was part of M&A transactions, and I could see how those decisions get made outside in, and it was a very valuable perspective. And I'm jumping to Fogarov's second question on when I was deciding on whether or not to sell Wingman. So to the second part of your question, I think when we started the business, me and my two co-founders, we were always very clear that this is a business and it has certain goals and objectives. It's not our identity, our lifetime commitment, right? And so we always looked at it as, it's something that we are doing to create value for ourselves and for our employees and everybody else in the ecosystem. And, logically speaking, if you take all of the other emotions out of it, there are, parts and cycles in a business when it makes most sense for you to consider an acquisition. All right. And we just happened to be at one of those cycles when the world around us was also changing in a manner that made it, very attractive. And I'll kind of lay that out a little bit. So this was start of 2022, just post all of the COVID tailwind for all of the SaaS businesses. But at the same time, suddenly everybody was not feeling so happy about SaaS. Everybody, as investors, felt that things are overvalued. companies that had raised money were flush with cash, but didn't really have, great growth options because the COVID tailwinds were beginning to die out. And then, suddenly the Russia-Ukraine war started, which meant that everybody kind of just froze in their tracks and things kind of, were going to become difficult or at least stagnant for a while. So, given where we were in our journey at that point, we were looking to actually either get to the next stage, which is do a reasonable fundraise and then aim for, the eight-figure million revenue numbers. So what it meant for us at that point was, if we had to either raise capital to accelerate fast, or we needed to become part of something that was already growing and accelerating fast, where they were flush with capital and we could give them a way to grow faster. And so, we kind of evaluated both the options. The second one is what worked out given everything else in the ecosystem at that point.
And that's great. I mean, one thing with my own experience of entrepreneurship I've understood is that it's very important to know when to exit, as important as to enter, right? Or staying in. And I think that's sometimes very underestimated, or even not given the kind of importance that it should be, right? So I think that's really cool. And so once you exit it out and you spend the time that you spent with other founders or figuring out what you needed to do, why Momentum Studio and what is it that you want to achieve? And maybe we'll get into the topic from there on. But just wanted to understand that part as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So while I was still at Clary and, for the time that I was looking at businesses internationally for Clary, I was always talking to a lot of founders, right? Because my role even at Clary was around international partnerships. I was looking at some early stage tech companies that could be interesting partners. Also, by then, I had a good network of founders through Y Combinator and through SaaS Boomi and other networks. And what I was realizing was that a lot of founders were asking the same question, which is, hey, I believe I have this great product, but somewhere I feel like my go to market is failing, right? Like I want to get to this X million dollars in revenue by end of the year. What is a way to get there, right? And what I realized was that what a lot of times people were not recognizing was the fact that you don't start asking the question once you already have that product. Ideally, you need to take your market into account on day one. You need to truly understand who your customer is, why will they come to you, when during the day will they come and use your product before you start building it, right? And if you're not doing that and you start with the product and then start to go to market with it, so to speak, it becomes a constant tussle because you either have the wrong thing or you don't know what to tell the person to convince them that this is the right thing, or you don't know how to show them value. And like there's so many failure points that it just breaks down on so many different levels. And so when I started seeing this pattern, I felt like it made sense to try and start working with founders earlier in their journey before, they had fully figured out what the product was going to be, or they were so committed to one product, because it was very hard for people who've already spent like 2 years building something that they are deeply passionate about to then do a reboot. And so that's kind of where the Momentum Studio was born, where I felt like it made a lot more sense if I could actually work with founders so that we could start the right way the first time around versus having to do a hard reset or a reboot after a couple of years of time and energy.
Very well. And I think that kind of just glides into our topic for the day, right? I mean, we've been discussing that early on, what are the signals to catch or what are the noises to kind of cut off. And think that conversation led to this framework, this beautiful framework of yours, which has been there for a long time. But how is it being used in tech versus just the product market fit? I think that was very intriguing. So you want to talk about this 4P framework that you have, and why do you think it is important and relevant in today's time?
Absolutely. So I think everybody is super familiar with, product market fit. And when you're starting up, that's kind of the holy grail. That's the milestone that you're looking for. But I think it's a big misnomer. And the reason is that the first word in that is product, right? And so everybody assumes that you're starting with a product and you're just trying to find the market where it fits, right? It's like finding, you have a key and you're trying to find the lock which it can unlock. But honestly, that's really not how, the game works. What you need to start with is actually the door and the lock, right? Not with the key that can go open it, right? And that is where the 4Ps framework, which is really pain, promise, sorry, persona, pain, promise, and product, really brings this to life. And what I hadn't fully recognized when I was building Wingman was like, hey, you have to start with persona, but you don't jump directly from persona to product. You still have to go through the cycle of going, understanding what is this person's pain and what is the promise that they care about, and then build the product. And when, a couple of years back, I was actually going through, reading about some frameworks. One of them was a four fits framework, which was, how there is more than just product market fit, there is channel fit, there's pricing fit, etc. And I came across this, and so many things unlocked in my mind about my own journey with Wingman, where, intuitively we had gone through that process of starting with a product idea and then gone and spoken to people or persona, but we hadn't really called out, the pain and the promise. And it had taken us quite a few cycles to then get the product to fit to the persona, because we didn't have a clear basis for separating out that, this persona has many different pains. We need to identify what is a high priority pain for them. And then from all of the pains that they have, and we've identified maybe one or two, we still need to understand what is the right promise to make to this person. And I'll maybe give an example to make this more clear, right? Like in
Sure.
the case of Wingman, a persona was, actually, it wasn't even clear who our persona was on day one, because we had started with saying that there is a lot of value stored in sales conversations. And maybe the person who can unlock that value is the head of sales, but maybe that person is, your product person or your marketing person, because they also want to know what your customers are saying. All right. And so when we started talking, we didn't really even know what the persona was. And then, we iterated through it. We said, what, maybe the person with the who will get most value out of this will be the head of sales. So let's focus on that persona. Now, when we went to the head of sales, they told us that their problem was, we weren't asking them about their problem, right? So we said, hey, this is the product. Now, how would you use this product? And they told us that, oh, if you gave me this product, I would want to use this to coach my sales reps, right? And we immediately went in and said, okay, great. So now let's build a product to coach sales reps using sales call data. But what we didn't realize was that coaching sales reps wasn't one of their top three pains or priorities, right? They were not already spending time doing that. Their top priority was trying to get more revenue. Honestly, as a head of sales, you don't care whether your top rep gets you 80% of the revenue, or, each of your five reps get you 20% of the revenue, right? You only care about what the top line looks like. And that
Mm.
is your biggest priority. And so, picked a pain and we picked a promise that wasn't actually the right promise. Because then the promise that they wanted us to make was, can you convert my lower performing reps or my B reps into my A reps, right? While that was a promise that was obvious from the pain that we had picked, which was, coaching sales reps, neither the pain nor the promise were right. And so the product that we were building was also not right, right? So it's just something that when I came across, so many things flashed by me. And I felt like this was such a common mistake that founders make, because we all start with a particular product idea or a product bias. And then we, just go around trying to find who's the right person for this. But we never question, like, hey, within the organization, who's the right persona? Does this really matter to them as one of their top three pains? Does this really tie in with one of their KPIs? How will they think about the promise? How will they think about the ROI?
Yeah, I think there is another P, which is actually a problem here, which I think is passion, right? And the reason I say that is because when founders are beginning to create something, they get so passionate about solving the problem that they think is the problem, and they start loving their product so much that they don't realize that it is important to go through this whole, exploration cycle of the persona, of the pain, of the promise, and not just get into the product and then killing yourself with getting the product market fit. So I think it's very well said. But now that you work with different founders at different scale, or even early on. Do you think it's easier said than done, or when you explain them, people really do understand this and they are okay and have the patience to go through this whole exploration cycle? What has been your experience with them?
It's definitely not easy, right? We all live in a world with our own biases and we are constantly seeing the world through our own lens. So I think as a founder, there is so much focus and so much value that gets placed on these stories of people, overcoming all odds, everybody telling them that they were wrong, but, they had this true vision and passion and then, they made it through. That the more and more we hear those stories, we begin to feel like I need to just go at it with 100% passion, 100% commitment. And there is no space for me to sit back, doubt, or reflect and explore, like you said, right? So I would say that it's definitely hard to get people to actually take a step back because there's so much narrative around, passion can help you overcome all sorts of hurdles. People also feel that, you have to fake it till you make it. So, even if I don't feel confident about a problem, I should probably continue to fake that confidence and enthusiasm, even if, every day I'm hearing a different answer that I don't like or that doesn't, conform to my worldview. So I would say it's definitely hard, right? It's not easy to get people to also get to a space of vulnerability because you have to feel like you're willing to at least doubt yourself before you will go and ask the right questions. So it's a tough journey as founders. And today what I see is that a lot of people, are realizing that you can't just come to the go to market later because with AI, getting to the product has become easier, right? In the previous world, a lot of times because making a good product was so hard that people were okay to say that, hey, if I can just make a good product, I've already crossed so many hurdles, I've proven so much, I can then go raise funding and I'll somehow figure my way through go to market, right? But today the equation is reversed, right? Because making products has become cheaper, it also means that everything that gets built has so much competition, right? And therefore the focus on go to market is that much higher, which really means that you have to go in and have a very strong and differentiated point of view on the pain and the promise. And the only way you get to a good, strong point of view on those two things is if you've spent enough time in the exploration part with your persona.
Yeah, and it's amazing you say that. With my own experience, I'll tell you that while go to market is absolutely very, very important and hard to get, and hard to get that scale in the go to market as well. Repeatable, predictable kind of business. But I'll also take one step back and say that creating a product is easier, but creating a valuable product is still very hard. So you can create a wrong product much faster, but creating the right product, even with what AI has to offer, is still, I think, the black hole. And without doing the process of what you're talking about, the persona pain or the promise or the other process that you have, you will just get faster to the wrong product. I mean, you may take 12 months before, now you can do it in 2 months, but it is still going to be the wrong product. So I think that's the distinction, in my view, is very clear. But do you think, is that what you're getting to as well? Is that something right?
So it's funny that you mentioned that, right? Like what has happened is that while it's easier to get to a product, right? Whether right or wrong, but sometimes people just stumble on the right one by
Sure,
chance, right?
sure.
But I think what people don't recognize is how much of a anchor weight a product carries, right? And so even though you might have come up with that product with just 1 month of, coding effort, etc., but it already biases you and steers you in one direction, right?
Hmm.
And it steers every conversation that you have with every possible customer into that direction.
Yeah.
So the danger and the risk is much higher because when you go in with a prototype, right, the chances are that the customer is going to give you answers based on what they are seeing on the screen with that prototype, right? They're not going to come around and say, you know what, this looks great, but honestly, this is not my top five problems, right? I am very likely to give you a positive response like, that's very interesting, and like ask you polite questions like, what else can the AI do? Do you think the AI can do this other thing for me as well? And you take each of those questions as validation that this person is interested in what I just built, right? But the fact is that by putting something out there, you've already put yourself in a box. And everything that you are seeing is from the point of view of that box.
Right, because that's what you've defined now, and you're going to protect that box in every conversation that you make. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so, in many ways, it's just become easier for you to put yourself in a box now than it was a few years back.
So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the persona, pain, promise before the product. And between the persona, pain, promise, which one do you think is the more important than the others? And what is the sequence of that? Like, how as a founder, if I want to get into a product right now, how should I be thinking about it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to start with is the persona, right? And if anything, today, deeply understanding a persona has become even more important because you don't have to look for the largest market, right? You can actually look for a super specific niche, which means that, the variety of persona that you could be working with is much, much larger, right? Because
Hmm.
earlier, who you could work with was defined by, hey, is this market large enough to justify the investment for making a product, right? And today, people have all sorts of hypotheses that you could build micro SaaS products. Maybe there are only 1,000 users, maybe there are 10,000 users. You could build it and build a business out of it still efficiently because, making the product is easier, right? So I would say it's a very important skill, and it has become even more important in today's world because that's the starting point of the journey. Right. And then to go from that persona to the pain, and I'll tell you something, there is a way to actually diagnose where have you gone wrong, right? So very often, if you sit down with a founder, you can ask any founder, like they'll already have some sort of hypothesis, they'll have some sort of, product idea in their mind, right? You can ask them to define like, hey, what is the persona? What is the pain? What is the promise you're making? And what is your product, right? And how does that meet the promise? You can actually do a very interesting diagnostic where you can find out like where in this journey there is a breakage, right? So if there's a breakage between your persona and your pain, what will happen is that the person will not be interested in even listening to your pitch, right?
Hmm.
So essentially, if I'm doing an exploration and I'm saying like, hey, I think that this is a real pain for founders, right? Like doing SEO is a real pain for founders, right? If I go with that pitch and nobody wants to talk to me, then, really the question is that maybe SEO is not such a big pain for the founders,
Hmm.
right? Or maybe at least it's not one of their top three priorities,
Yeah.
right? Now, when I go from the pain to the promise, right? And if there is a breakage, what it means is that while they feel the pain, they don't feel that the promise is either solving the pain or it's going to deliver reliably on that pain.
Hmm.
Right. And so, if I go in and say, like, hey, you take the meeting with me, you say, like, hey, yeah, SEO is a big pain for me. And then, if I say that my promise is that I will get you as one of the top 5 blue links in 5 different search terms that you care about, and you don't come back to me for the next meeting, right? The chances are that you don't believe the promise,
Hmm.
right? Or I have either underballed the promise or I've overballed the promise, right? Where, the promise either doesn't solve the pain or it's not possible to deliver on that,
Hmm.
right?
Maybe over promising, right?
Yeah, maybe you're overpromising. And I think in the early days, everybody suffers from the problem of overpromising because
Hmm.
we just want to make the world a better place, right? As founders. And we feel that there is so much possibility and we could be doing so many different things.
Right.
And then there is the struggle from the promise to the product, which is what shows up when you are not able to convert your customers from demos or POCs into contracts, right?
Hmm.
Where I bought into the promise, which is why I was ready to spend time with you to, try out your product. But after I've tried out your product, I'm not willing to pay for it, right? Or I'm not willing to commit to it long term because somewhere the product is failing in delivering on the promise. So I think this is kind of the cycle that becomes very obvious because everybody has breakage at different points. And what you're trying to do is, you still have to go back from the product to the persona constantly, because very often you start with a wedge, and then you want to also grow your footprint, and you want to be like, what else should I make? Where else can I add value to this person? And so once you've honed in on a persona, and especially today, you could very well be like, I could solve all of your different problems. I don't just have to solve this one pain because my relationship is with the persona.
Sure. So all of the problems for that particular specific persona, right? Got it. No, I think the beautiful thing in what I just heard, Shruti, is that you can actually put it as a process and have those steps be involved and figure out where is it missing or where the steps are not or where is it broken, right? Because once you know where is it broken, you can fix it and increase your probability of success rather than going blind in it, not knowing where you're going, and then just thinking that the product will do wonders with what I've created. So I think that's actually beautiful.
Yeah. And, to the point that you made earlier, right? Like, is it easy for founders to switch to this frame of thinking? I think once you put this diagnostic in front of them, then it becomes very easy for them to comprehend that, there are actually these four discrete steps. And, it's much easier for me to now say, like, hey, what do I need to change? Is it the pain? Is it the promise? Is it the product? And I don't think of it as just one big monolith.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. We're coming up with a product for one of my businesses that we've been working on. And I think I like to go through this diagnosis myself. So I think something really interesting, yeah. So let's talk about the product market fit. How do I have heard so many versions of product market fit, and people tend to talk about and use this term very loosely. So what is a product market fit, and how do you know when you get it?
So I think it used to be something that people thought of as a static state, that once you got it, you had it, right? And just in terms of definition, right? Like, the way to think about it is that you feel that there is a pull for the product from the market, right? That's kind of the easiest way to think of it, where you feel that every subsequent sale is getting easier for you, right? Because you know exactly who to approach, you know what to tell them, you know what pains to tie that product to, what how the budgets will become available for it, and therefore every subsequent sale is getting easier because you've figured out all of these other questions in today's world. And I think there was already a trend. It's just that the trend has become a lot more pronounced now in the post AI world, especially in for tech companies, is that you don't just get to product market fit and keep it for the rest of your life. It's something that you need to continue to fight for. And the reason is that, today you might be solving that problem at a certain level for a particular persona. Tomorrow, that problem might change, or their expectation of what a good solution for it looks like might change. And so you need to constantly be iterating and improving, and, ideally getting to better product market fit or product market fit for newer products within your own portfolio, because there is also the trend of multiple small products that all serve the same market. So I think to that extent, it's an iterative journey. And the other part to it, which is the four fits framework around product market fit, is to also think about it as, it's not just the fit between the product and the market, but it's also to think about, how do I sell this product, right? It's not just about who do I sell it to, which is your market, but how do I sell it, and at what price point do I sell it, right?
Hmm.
So you also need to discover the fit with respect to the channel and the pricing for that product, and for that loop to keep going. And if at any point you decide to enter a new market or decide to make a new product, you need to then consciously go through that cycle of saying, like, hey, does the same channel, does the same pricing principles still apply to this product and this market?
Very interesting. So I think the whole definition of product market fit is also evolving as we go along, and getting a little bit, I would say, more tricky in a current situation than maybe what it was before. So tell me something, AI, how does this whole 4P framework or even the product market fit, how has that changed with disruption of AI or inclusion of AI? Has it made any impact, or it was the same prior to AI and even today, or what has changed?
So I would say that with the four Ps framework, right? A lot of times people were actually just starting with thinking of two components, right? The person and the product. With AI, I think there is a lot more of an opportunity to really break it up in terms of the pain and the promise for two reasons. One is, building the product or building a prototype has become much faster. So you can kind of think of imagination for solutions in many different ways. Right? So even if I came up with a single problem for you and a single promise for that problem, there are still five different routes you could take as products to solve that problem, right? And the possibility of how many of those routes are feasible in you know just economically feasible to build has become much more, right? So I think that is one reason or one strong way to think about, splitting out your product and market into also thinking about the pain and the promise. The second part, really, which is what we spoke about earlier, is that because it's become kind of cheaper to build products, but that also weighs you down and anchors you. It is that much more important to make sure that you're thinking about the pain and the promise, because you don't want to land up with a wrong product. So I think both the possibilities have increased in the post AI world of what you could be building, and two, how you relate to that pain and that promise has also changed. And I think the third point, which is related, is today, you can think of your products and your promise in terms of outcomes, whereas earlier you were thinking of them in terms of workflows.
Hmm.
Right. And what that means in terms of your ability to think of the decision maker, of the pricing, is significantly different from what it was 3, 4 years back.
No, that's interesting. And do you think, I mean, with AI, you can also kind of debate that can AI do this 4P framework for me? So let's say if I use Claude or any other AI agent and I say, hey, I am trying to do this, how does this 4P framework would look like for this? I'm sure it will give me some kind of a result out there, right? Do you think that's valid enough, or is there a more physical way to do this, which is go out and take some surveys, interviews, talk to people? Like, what is a better
Yeah.
way to get to this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a very important point, and both in terms of what AI can help you with and what AI can't help you with. And in fact, we go through this as a process in the Momentum Studio, where AI can do a fantastic job in helping you get started with your secondary research, right? You want to do market sizing, you want to analyze a bunch of data, you want to kind of do your analyst report version 1 on a problem thesis. It can do a great job, right? But whatever you framed as your question heavily biases the answer that it's giving you. It's very unlikely that it can give you an insight saying that, hey, you know what, while this is a significant problem, I have evidence that they are only spending 3 hours a month on this, right? Because very often that data doesn't exist in that form on the internet, right? And so it's very easy for you to take those conclusions and get biased and say, like, hey, I have full validation, I have these 25 data points. But what you need to get smarter with is to say, hey, what are the questions that I haven't yet asked, right? And if I ask these questions to AI, what information source can it actually use to reliably answer that question? If I realize that there is actually no reliable public data source for that question, then I need to start thinking about my primary research, or what I like to also call is like primary research with secondary sources,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
is where if I'm evaluating a broad space of things, I can't go and interview 30 people in each of those five different spaces. But what I can do is I can go and speak to somebody who I think can give me the aggregate point of view that I might get from speaking to 30 people. And it's not the same as speaking to the 30 people, but at least it's a starting point in helping me prioritize between those five areas, right? So I'll just give you an example. Like one of the companies at the Momentum Studio last cohort, they started with saying like there is a lot of chaos in the information across different channels like Instagram, WhatsApp, emails, phone calls that a lot of solopreneurs have to deal with, right? And so, the problem they wanted to solve was organizing and making sense of this information that is spread out across different channels. But they had many different segments of personas they could do this for, right? They could do this for freight forwarders, they could do this for your truck drivers, they could do this for business coaches, they could do this for health and fitness coaches, they could do this for influencers. So you can imagine, right? Like these are very, very different segments. But the underlying problem or promise is somewhat the same. So, in a case like that, you would start with doing the secondary research, which, your AI is great at, but then you would switch tracks. You'll probably narrow down from 10 to 3 or 5, and then you would switch tracks to doing like primary research with your secondary sources, right? Which is like, hey, instead of speaking to 30 business coaches, can I speak to somebody who makes software or has sold to business coaches before, right? Because this person can tell me a lot of things about general patterns for business coaches. Can I speak to a salesperson who has sold to this particular industry of truck
Sure.
drivers?
Hmm.
And then you kind of iterate on that and say, like, how do I, now I have better clarity. I know what questions to ask. And then you actually start your primary research process. And for that, I highly recommend the mob test methodology, which helps you make sure that you're not biasing your user with the questions that you ask.
Interesting. Interesting. No, that's great. So I think we're coming at the end of the podcast, Shruti, and this was great. I think we really got some good amount of understanding of how to think about the whole product journey much better than just diving into it with passion. And a lot of us do that, at least the first time around. So Shruti, anything that I may have missed that you would want to talk about to the audience before we let you go?
I think it's just that if you can answer the question of what is the ROI that I will deliver and what KPIs that ROI link to, then you have an intuitive understanding of the pain and the promise. If that answer is not clear, or if you have a long list of 5 or 10, then you probably need to go back and think more deeply.
Got it. So before we let go of our, guests, we talk about this. That what is the joy of entrepreneurship for you? Why are you doing it?
I think when I started Wingman, the reason was I felt entrepreneurship was the only way you could feel fully alive because you could actually control so many different aspects of what you were working on. And today, I work with other founders because I still feel it's like being an entrepreneur is the most fulfilling way to use your energies and your talents. But I also recognize how hard it is, and I want to be able to help people grow that joy while maybe minimizing the sorrow that comes with it.
No, I second that. I think it is hard, but everything is hard, and I think that's also very relative. But the fully alive part is, I think you've really hit it absolutely out of the park with that, and that's absolutely correct. I think a lot of us do this because we know there is no better feeling than creating something which we can take out to the world, right? So thank you for doing this with us, and we'll love to get into maybe a second episode of, I want to have that conversation of noise versus signal, but that's, we'll leave it for some other day. But thanks Shruti, thanks for
Absolutely.
your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gaurav, and thanks for having me.